Welcome to the Nat Theo podcast, where we explore nature, the Bible, and what both of them show us about our Creator God, who made this wild and wonderful world. I'm your host, Erin Lynham. I'm a certified master naturalist, Bible teacher, and author, and I am so excited to explore God's Word and His created world with you. Hi, listeners. Today, we will be diving into the dark to shed some light on glowing creatures. You can download and print a full episode activity guide for today's lesson, including a coloring page, poster, word search puzzle, and more fun Firefly facts that we won't have time to cover on today's show. That guide is available for Nat Theo Club members, and you can learn more and join at erinlynham.com/nattheo or at the link in today's show notes. You can also download and print a free coloring page to go along with today's episode, including some of the fun glow-in-the-dark creatures we're going to learn about. Download and print that at my website at the link in today's show notes or erinlynham.com/nattheo13. Before we dive into the world of glow-in-the-dark creatures, I have a question for you. If you want to make a beautiful picture of a waterfall, what supplies might you need? Would you grab a piece of paper or a sketchbook? Maybe you would reach for watercolor paints or markers or crayons and colored pencils. What are your favorite materials for creating art? And how might you begin your picture? There are so many possibilities. You could start by drawing a mountain range so that your waterfall could be pouring over the rocks. You could grab some green and make a hillside full of trees. The waterfall could be pouring into a deep pool of water or cascading down and flowing into a river winding its way through the woods. If you want to add a rainbow arcing over your waterfall, you are going to need a lot of colors. When we want to create something, we take inspiration, ideas, and materials from what God has already made. Our art reflects His creation. We use the colors and the shapes and the textures that He dreamed up back at creation. You see, we always create with what has already been made, but God's creativity is different. Back at creation, God created everything from nothing. I want to teach you a word today from a different language, one of the languages that the Bible was originally written in. The word is bara. Can you say that? Bara. This word means create, but it is special. In the Bible, this word is only used when God created. It's a special type of creativity that only God has, since only He can create out of nothing. Listen to Hebrews 11:3. It says, "It is by faith we understand that the whole world was made by God's command. So what we see was made by something that cannot be seen." When God created all the amazing things that we see out in nature, He didn't begin with a palette of paint. Instead, as He was creating everything, He was also making all the colors. Only God can create out of nothing. I love learning more about God's art and designs. And today we are exploring a very cool design that God gave many living creatures. Here's our trail map for today. We are going to look at what is bioluminescence. We'll see what creatures can glow in the dark. We'll learn how do fireflies light up. And finally, how can we shine God's light? Before we start down our trail of discovery, I have a trivia question for you. How big is the biggest firefly? Maybe use your fingers or hands to show how big you think the biggest firefly is, and we'll find out at the end of today's episode. There is a very cool design God gave many living creatures. It's called bioluminescence. Have you ever heard that word? It's a big one. Let's break it down. We've learned in past episodes that bio refers to life. Luminescence means light. So bioluminescence means living light. God created many creatures to glow in the dark by giving them bioluminescence. Think about God back at creation. Just like we talked about when he made all the colors while he was creating all the creatures, God also made light, then gave some creatures that light, almost like he was using light as another color of paint. Have you ever made a painting with a sun or a moon or stars or other kinds of light like a lamp? It's very difficult with paint or markers to get that shining effect of glowing light. But God did just that. He put light right into creatures. Can you think of any creatures that have bioluminescence or that can give off light? You might be thinking of fireflies, or sometimes they're called lightning bugs. Where I live in Colorado, we have very few fireflies. I've never actually seen one here. But I grew up in Wisconsin, and we had fireflies almost every summer night. I remember watching out the window or out in my yard at dusk just when the sun was setting, as these little living, blinking lights flew gently up from the grass and filled the sky. It was truly amazing and a very special part of my childhood. We're going to learn more about fireflies and how they create their light. But first, I want to share with you a few other creatures that God created to glow in the dark. When we learn about bioluminescence, we really need to take a deep dive under the sea, because most creatures that glow are in the ocean. In fact, once you go about 650 feet below the sea level, that's about half the height of the Empire State Building. Almost all creatures have some sort of bioluminescence and can create light. And that's a good thing because it is very dark that deep down in the sea. This area of the ocean is known as the twilight zone, and the sun's light cannot reach it. At that depth, about 80 to 90% of creatures can glow. Have you ever heard of a moon jellyfish? Several years ago, my family was exploring the Pacific Ocean in Washington State. We went down to a dock over the water, and there were so many moon jellyfish bobbing in the water right by the dock. There were hundreds of them. They look like gooey, see-through creatures. My kids laid on their stomachs on the dock, and they gently ran their fingers over the top of the moon jellyfish. Moon jellyfish are popular and well known because they can glow in the dark. But they're not the only jellyfish that can do that. In fact, over half of all jellyfish species can glow. Let's look at a fish that can glow. Have you ever heard of an anglerfish? If you've seen the movie Finding Nemo, you might remember the anglerfish. He's that crazy-looking creature that has a hanging light, sort of like a little lantern over his head. And he uses that light to attract other creatures toward him so he can catch and eat them. You know what is fascinating? The anglerfish does not make his own light. Instead, that structure that looks like a little lantern is filled with other tiny glowing creatures called photobacterium. These tiny glowing creatures are a type of bacteria, little creatures that God made that are so small, we need a microscope to see them individually. Beneath the ocean's waters, there are also 3 types of shark that can produce living light, including the kitefin shark, black-belly lantern shark, and the southern lantern shark. Okay, let's resurface from the sea and take a breath. We are going to look at our next glow-in-the-dark creature, but first I have a note for the parents and caregivers listening. Do you want to know more about God's unique way of creating, that bara creating from nothing, and how it can inspire our kids' creativity? In my new book, Rooted in Wonder, I have a full chapter devoted to this called Creation and Creativity, and it includes ideas to help inspire your family in exploring God's creation and using what He has made as inspiration for your art and work. You can pick up a copy on Amazon or at my website or wherever books are sold, and I'll include a link to that in today's show notes. Now on to our next glowing creature. On our last episode, we learned all about fungus and mushrooms. Today, we'll learn another fascinating thing about mushrooms, and that is that around 80 species of mushroom can glow in the dark. Throughout history, there were mentions of a cold, glowing light in the woods, which later became known as foxfire. And it actually had nothing to do with foxes, but instead is probably from the French word meaning false, like a false light. For a long time, when people read old documents, like one written by Aristotle over 2,400 years ago, no one knew what this foxfire or light in the woods was. But then naturalists and scientists figured out this mystery in the year 1823. They were looking at wooden support beams deep inside a mine that were glowing. And they discovered that the glow came from bioluminescent fungal growth, or mushrooms with living light that was growing on the wood. So if you're walking through a forest at night and you see a strange glow, it might just be one of these special species of mushroom that God created with living light. Speaking of the woods at night, it's time to go back to fireflies, which are often found in the woods in the Midwest. Have you ever seen fireflies? Their ability to light up the night sky is truly beautiful. They look like a bunch of twinkly lights floating through a field or a forest. But how do they light up? A firefly can light up by combining several things in its body. Put simply, their light is a chemical reaction between 2 main things. 1, a molecule called luciferin, and 2, an enzyme called luciferase. Put very simply, when these 2 things meet and come together, that luciferase enzyme breaks down the luciferin molecule, and there is a liberation, a setting free of light. Isn't that a beautiful picture? God created fireflies and all these other amazing glow-in-the-dark creatures to have this chemical reaction and produce living light. Let's look a little closer at the firefly. Do you remember episode 7 when we learned all about the roly-poly or pill bug? And we saw that things in nature are not always what they seem. Well, the same is true for the firefly. Although they're called a firefly, they are not a fly at all. And sometimes they're called a lightning bug, but they are not a true bug. Fireflies or lightning bugs are actually beetles. And there are over 2,000 different species of fireflies. All these species of fireflies belong in a category of beetles called Lamparidae. Most beetles in the Lamparidae family create living light, but not all of them. This really confused me a few years ago when I learned that not all lightning bugs light up. But you know what? They did at one point in their lives. Do you remember from past episodes that the baby form of an insect can be called larva? Well, the larvae of lightning bugs glow. They are called glowworms. Glowworms are the baby or juvenile form of a firefly, and all glowworms glow. So even if a lightning bug doesn't light up as an adult, it did when it was a baby. Did you know that just like God gave fireflies and so many other amazing creatures the ability to light up, He has done the same for us? No, we don't have bioluminescence, but in a different and very important way, God has given us the ability to shine light, and not just any light. God helps us to shine His light. If you remember from the beginning of today's episode, when we create something, we always use materials that God has already provided. We saw that this is also true with fireflies. Their light is created from what God put into them, that luciferin molecule and luciferase enzyme. The same is true for us. We have living light inside because of what God has put into us. Now, we don't glow like fireflies or foxfire mushrooms. We have a different type of light, a light that comes straight from God. 1 John 1:5 says, God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. You see, God doesn't only have light, and He didn't only create light. God is light, and He gives that living light to us. In the Bible, God's light can mean His truth. 2 Corinthians 4:6 says this, God once said, let the light shine out of the darkness. This is the same God who made His light shine in our hearts by letting us know the glory of God that is in the face of Christ. God's light, His truth, shines in our hearts and in our minds and helps us understand who God is and how He loves us. So God's light is truth, and it is also His love and kindness and goodness. And all of these things can be inside of us, shining like a bright light as we choose to follow God. Listen to Matthew 5:14-16. You are the light that gives light to the world, and people don't hide a light under a bowl. They put it on a lampstand so the light shines for all people in the house. In the same way, you should be a light for other people. Live so that they will see the good things you do and will praise your Father in heaven. When other people who don't know or follow God see His light inside us, they can become curious about that light. They're drawn to it. They might ask, hey, how come it seems you have so much joy? Or how come you have hope when life is hard? Or I notice you don't act the same way as other kids. Why is that? Just like the glow-in-the-dark creatures that use bioluminescence that God has put inside them, we can give light to the world, a world that is sometimes dark with fear, confusion, sin, and hard things. But we cannot make that light on our own. It only comes from God Himself, the Master Creator. In John 8:12, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. The person who follows me will never live in darkness, but will have the light that gives life. So let's keep getting into God's Word and exploring His wonder-filled world. Let's keep spending time in prayer and shining God's light in this world. Do you remember our trivia question? How big is the biggest firefly? It's called the Lamprigera firefly, and females can grow to be the size of the palm of an adult's hand. And get this, their larva, the glowworm, is about the same size. That's a huge glowing worm and firefly. Here's a challenge for this week. With your adult or caregiver, go outside at dusk. This is a beautiful time in God's creation. Sit or walk out in nature right as the sun is setting and see what colors you can see, what noises you can hear, and what smells you can smell. Whether you're in your yard or at the park down the street or in a field or wooded area, notice all of God's creativity and enjoy His art as the sun slips below the horizon. And don't forget, you can learn even more about fireflies and find some super fun firefly and glowing creature activities on our episode activity guide. Learn more at erinlynham.com/nattheo or at the link in today's show notes.